Hello, my name is Father Gregory Pine, and I'm a Dominican friar of the province of St. Joseph, and this is Pints with Aquinas. And so in this episode, I'd like to talk about whether or not you have to be smart in order to be holy. Here's the thing. We all have our intuitions on this question. It might depend in part on your societal, cultural, political background. Regardless, there are some people who tend to think that intelligence is actually a stumbling block to holiness. It's like you're making things too complex, you're making things too weird, just like let the smart people be the smart people and let us be the holy people, which is one instinct or one intuition on the matter. There are other people though, and especially as the Catholic Church, and I'm thinking here in a particular way of the American Church becomes better evangelized, better catechized, better studied, that there is this kind of weird intellectual hierarchy, it seems, in the church, and you're better to the degree or extent that you're smarter, which I think is also a little weird, a little wonky. So I want to thread the needle and propose something about human intelligence as it concerns our pursuit of holiness, so that way we all have the resources to make this pilgrimage of life with greater ease, promptitude, and delight. So let's kick it. Okay, so to focus our endeavor, I'd like to start with one of the parables from the Gospel of Matthew, the parable of the 10 virgins. You recall the parable in its rough outlines: 10 virgins waiting for the bridegroom. 5 of them are prudent, it says, and then 5 of them are foolish or dumb. I think the word is moronic, in fact, in the Greek. And so the 5 prudent ones, they bring extra oil with which to trim their lamps, and then the 5 foolish ones do not. And then when it comes time for the bridegroom to arrive, they have to replenish their stores, and as a result, they miss the wedding feast and they are locked outside. So, say what one will about this particular parable, one thing that I think is clear is that there are certain things that cannot be had at the last minute, and there are certain things that cannot be borrowed. In large part, while we affirm on the one hand that we can be saved by a deathbed conversion, or that the Lord might permit us to wander to the very edge of the earth only to pull us back by a twitch upon the thread, as we see portrayed beautifully in Catholic art and Catholic fiction. We want to live our lives towards that goal in a way that's deliberate and intentional. So we don't want to presume upon the grace of God, nor do we want to despair of it, right? We want to hope, and hoping in the grace of God means making use of the means that God gives us in order to attain to Him. So one of those means, I would submit to you, is the habit of study, okay? Which is part of our contemplative life. So here we go. We are made to the image of God. You'll often see St. Thomas use those precise words, ad imaginem Dei, so towards the image of God. And we have this capacity, right? We have a mind with which to know and a heart with which to love, but these capacities are poised towards operation, right? They're meant to move, they're meant to act, they're meant to unfold, they're meant to grow, they're meant to, you get this, okay? So the image of God is not something merely static on which we can repose. It's something dynamic that we're meant to leverage so as to conduct us through the whole of our Christian life. So our minds are meant to know God with God's own knowledge of Himself, and our hearts are meant to love God with His own love of Himself, and so progress in a kind of conformity to or assimilation to the Godhead, which draws us into that Trinitarian communion. All right, so what we've described here is effectively a contemplative life, because we're considering the highest things, the highest causes, even if only momentarily, right? That affords greatest wonder, greatest delight. And in this contemplative life, the means that are placed at our disposal are things with which you are familiar. So you might think here of prayer, of sacrament, of study, of penance, of service of the material poor, of Christian friendship, of the sacred scriptures, etc. But I would say that 2 essential features of this contemplative life are prayer and study, because they're 2 principal modes whereby we inquire, all right? They're kind of the 2 pistons or the twin turbines of intellectual inquiry, all right? And in this particular setting, so describing here the habit of study, I think it's really important to insist upon the study piece. I think prayer is more important insofar as prayer is just the daily fare of friendship. But I think that study is also very important. They're again, the 2 wings whereby we mount to the heights, to the grandeur of our contemplative vocation. So why? What are we talking about here exactly? This all falls within the setting of our human nature as a kind of nature on the way. So you may have heard human beings referred to as wayfarers or pilgrims. That's probably more common. One of the words that St. Thomas uses, it's often translated as wayfarers. It probably could be translated as pilgrims. Not that important, but it's viatores, so those of the way. And he says this in part because he's making a comparison of human beings to God and to angels, respectively. So God isn't on the way. God just is the end. And angels, they're not really on the way but for one moment in their lives, and then they're forever at the end because they're either in heaven or in hell. Whereas we are on the way throughout the whole duration of our earthly life until such time as we draw our last breath and then go to heaven or hell, perhaps to heaven by way of purgatory. So it's true of us as human beings that we are viatores, that we are decidedly on the way until such time as we become chelicole, which is to say, heaven dwellers. And in this pilgrimage, right, in this advance, we are meant to strive for perfection. So be therefore perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. We read in Matthew 5:48. That perfection is detailed for us in the double love command which our Lord proffers at a variety of points in the Gospels, namely to love the Lord your God with your whole mind, heart, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. So when we hear about the wholeness of this claim or of this demand, it's a little bit terrifying or imposing, but what we're being asked in effect is to hope, right? Specifically to hope that God's promises are true, that He will continue to furnish us with the means that we need to advance in this contemplative life, and that, while we may not have been made wholly and entirely perfect yesterday, nor even today, perhaps tomorrow, that we kind of approach life with this understanding that God can grow us and that we hold fast to that promise. So part of the life of study is furnishing our minds with the raw material, as it were, to mediate the encounter, which will draw us further up and further in to this experience of divine life. So in prayer, we're thinking about God. In study, we're, as it were, taking the different steps, working through the different movements, which will help us to think well about God, such that we can formulate affections, such that we can formulate resolutions in the context of prayer on the basis of what we have beheld or what we have believed. So then, I would submit to you that it is not necessary to be smart if you are to attain to a degree of holiness, but I don't think that you should discount the habit of study. I don't think that you should cultivate anti-intellectual habits because that will ultimately trip you up. So I think that what's important here is to insist on the habit of study. All right, it's not so much that you need to be smart, right? But you do need to be willing. You need to be willing to undertake the work of one made to the image and likeness of God, who is called to a contemplative life, which contemplative life mounts by the twin wings or the two wings of prayer and study to the heights of the vision of God. So, for instance, you might set aside 20 minutes a day for prayer. Over the course of the week, that'll total to 2 hours and 20 minutes of prayer? I would challenge you to set aside 1 hour a week of study. You can do it all in one go, or maybe break it up over 2 or 3 sessions, but to read something that you wouldn't ordinarily read, which might be a little more challenging or a little more demanding, such that you can draw out some of that native strength, whether natural or graced, and engage with the contemplation of God more rigorously and vigorously. So the chosen medium, I would say, would be reading. Podcasts are great, but they tend to be more passive. They teach us things, but they don't engage us in the same way. Whereas reading is a type of thing that we typically do more actively. Also, when it comes to the register of the work, I would say it's important to challenge yourself. The goal is not 100% comprehension. The goal is to grow. And oftentimes we grow when we are challenged with something that is beyond our ken or beyond our capacity, at least a little bit. So we're not looking for something that's going to completely bewilder us or bemuse us, but we are looking for something that has, that has within it the resources which we at present lack, because we hope to get those resources from the text with which we're engaging, from the relationship to which the author is testifying. And then I would submit that you should also work on your active engagement as you try to formulate good questions, as you try to meditate upon those questions, maybe even engage other people with whom you're reading this text in conversation, and then try to share it, right? Try to communicate it to people. in the sense that you want to be able to distill and concretize what it is that you've gained. And a great way to do that is to try to teach it or preach it, because then you come to discover how much you did learn or how much you didn't learn, as it were, both of which are revealing and helpful. And then I would say just be about your life, be about your business. St. Augustine has this line, ambulate et cantate, walk and sing, which is to say, be content to be on the way with your habit of study, and you'll pick up gems here and there, but ultimately you will come to a contemplation of God such that he becomes for you God contemplated, whom you can then testify to others of this relationship and then include them or incorporate them in what you have come to experience, what you've come to behold, which is awesome. That's really at the heart of Dominican preaching, which is sometimes referred to as holy preaching, that it's meant to instruct people in the rudiments basically of Christian perfection, in the profound mysteries of the Christian faith and of, the rudiments of the perfection of Christian life. So that's what I want to communicate. That's what I want to give. That's what I want to mediate by my teaching and preaching. And for me, it's vital that it be fueled by prayer and study. So you do not need to be smart to be holy, but you should not dismiss this important habit of study as an essential feature of your growth in the life of grace unto glory. Boom. All right, so that's what I wanted to share. This is Pints with Aquinas. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the channel, push the bell, get email updates when other cool things come out. Also, if you haven't yet, check out Godsplaining, which is a podcast to which I contribute with 4 other Dominican friars. We actually recently did an episode called The Intellectual Life at the end of last year. I did it with Father Bonaventure, so it's a longer discussion, more insightful insofar as he asks better questions than I do. So you can check that out for your profit. Also, we're just announcing now our Godsplaining retreats for the summer and the fall. So we'll have 3 retreats. You can find all the details about those retreats at godsplaining.org. And we hope to see you at those. Now I'm talking like a weirdo. Because they're awesome and because they're just golden moments. They're really like wonderful times in which to share the preaching and teaching charism with those who care and to, deepen the friendships which have begun via, podcasty means. And then the last thing is I wrote a book, and it's called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly. Maybe that could be your hour of study a week for the next month and a half. Who's to say? Not me, it's you. All right. Know of my prayers for you. Please pray for me, and I'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Pints with Aquinas.